I just published the second volume, well, just about 6 months. Three major themes that I wove together into one book. The first theme essentially is that of the encounters themselves. Anything that I consider to be important during that period, whether it was the Travis Walton abduction experience, the Gulf Breeze UFO sightings, the Belgian Triangle sightings of 1990, or any number of other cases. I sought to put those together into a very concise but complete description, and any reader could find out what they needed to know about those cases. The other theme, two other themes that I did, one is the politics. So that is trying to understand the attitude taken by political groups, military agencies, intelligence agencies, and so on. Did they take the UFO topic seriously during those years? If so, what were the things going on there? Was the U.S. president the guy in charge in managing the UFO topic? If not, then who was? Questions like this, I think, work their way into my book pretty significantly. And then the third major theme of the book that I wove into this was simply the research itself, or the history of ufology, you might say, which is a fascinating bit of our history that I really feel had not been covered adequately in any kind of historical treatment. When you really think about it, it's a history of human consciousness in trying to understand this great mystery, the UFO mystery. What does this mean? How do we understand it? Well, it turns out that the place that researchers were at in understanding this, say in 1973, was a very different place than where they ended up in 1991. The UFO phenomenon was absolutely real, that it was the result of technologies that were not supposed to exist. One way that we can say that this is definitely true is simply due to the vast number of military jet chases that we know of that occurred during that period of time. One of the real shortcomings of my first volume, as I look back on it now after all these years, is that I never adequately dealt with the German connection, at least in a satisfactory way. I've always regretted that. So I decided in this second volume that I would try to amend that to some extent. Although I should have done that in the earlier years, covering the 1940s, better late than never. So in this second volume, I do deal with the whole German argument. And it turns out it works out just fine, because it was only in the early 1970s that the thesis of the Nazi connection really started to make some headway anyway. Late by U.S. intelligence. So all of that fits. It makes perfect sense to assume that U.S. intelligence would be very interested in studying and probably furthering the work of these German scientists. And I do believe that there's a German connection here somewhere. Here's my question. If we want to try to explain all of these UFOs as a black operation, the one problem that I have is that in the world in the aftermath of World War II. And I'm not saying it could not have happened.
That's the Fourth Reich.
The Fourth Reich. Now, the question is, did they do it? And then the further follow-up question is, well, where's the evidence that they're still there and that they've created the infrastructure, manufacturing capability, and so forth to create their own flying saucers, independent of U.S. oversight? See, I'm not seeing a lot of evidence for this.
Have you included Admiral Byrd's work on this?
You know, but so the Nazi connection is important, and I think it's still not resolved fully to this day. The only issue that I would take with some of the proponents of the Nazi connection isn't that it's not that there isn't one there. There is a connection. The question is does it describe fully the entire context of the UFO phenomenon? To me, I think the answer to that is no. I think that there is more than enough evidence to show that a substantial part of the UFO phenomenon is the extraterrestrial component, or let's call it the non-human component. I don't think that explaining this fully as Nazi technology is satisfactory.
But there's a relevant portion of it. Do you think
Yes.
that's the Area 51 type stuff, or the new bases that they've got elsewhere?
Yeah, I firmly believe that over the decades, the clandestine world, the clandestine research and development world, has been developing what we would call that have extraordinary capabilities. So it muddies the UFO phenomenon, of course, to a great extent.
What about the Gary McKinnon stuff, or is that going to be Volume 3?
Absolutely. Gary McKinnon, I think, is a very important case, and he's going to be covered as well as I can cover him in Volume 3, without a doubt. It's a fascinating case. Here's a guy who, not even really a hacker so much as someone essentially standing at the door waiting for the door to open to see what was in the various Department of Defense websites, including U.S. Space Command and others. Gary McKinnon, I think, is telling the truth when he says he found things. And it makes perfect sense, because why else would he have been arrested for hacking into secure U.S. Defense Department records? And what he says he found, of course, was information relating to a secret space program. Non-terrestrial officers, ships that have no correspondence in U.S. Navy inventory, and so on. catastrophe. I don't know about this. However, I've spoken with a number of sources, high-level people, some of them are fairly well known, who have said to me not necessarily that we have an active presence on the moon or Mars, but that there are things there. I spoke to one gentleman, a scientist, a very well plugged-in scientist, I guess I could say, who told me that at Fort Meade, Maryland, NSA headquarters, there were remote viewers tasked with the job of remote viewing the far side of the moon. Now I said to the scientist, well, why would they be doing that? And he said, well, Richard, can't you guess? I said, well, are they looking for like anything extraterrestrial? He said, bingo. I said, did they find anything relating to extraterrestrials? He said, well, money, it fits in terms of the motive, and it certainly does comport with a number of the leaks that have come out. What I always try to do, though, is I try to quantify or rank the quality of my source. One thing that I know are that there are confirmed documents from the U.S. National Archives in College Park, Maryland, that describe UFO encounters. So no matter how crazy that's a topic of great importance, because it begs the question of who is operating those objects that we're chasing, and why are they able to outperform our jet fighters every single time. By itself, that's a fact of paramount importance. So there are certain things that, so to speak, you can take to the bank, and that's one of them. Rumors, leaks, yes, I think that we have to be open to listening to them. My note of caution simply comes from the fact that when you report every single rumor as though it's true, you know for sure that a lot of those rumors will turn out to be false. And when you start reporting false rumors along with the true ones, you're not really moving truth ahead at all. You're sort of disabling it. Back in the 1970s, a National Enquirer here in the United States, tabloid, published a lot of UFO stories. And you know, some of them actually were well reported and true. Enquirer had a journalist named Bob Pratt on its staff. Bob Pratt took his job seriously, and he investigated and reported a number of cases that turned out to be quite valid. But the problem was twofold. One was that the Enquirer at the same time published demonstrably false UFO stories that upon investigation were shown to be absolutely not true, or hoaxes and so forth. And then secondly, the most important problem with the National Enquirer is simply that Pratt's stories were reported in this trashy tabloid that nobody took seriously. And so what I'm saying here is that even good research, good rumors, true rumors, are damaged when they are reported at the same time with no distinction with rumors that turn out to be complete fabrications and falsehoods. The one thing that I really want to encourage researchers to do in this field is to be more cautious in reporting every single rumor that comes under their nose. Unfortunately, what happens is that any researcher, and this is a completely human response, gets excited when a new story comes to them. And then their first instinct is to say, look, world, look at, you know, what I have now. And after a while, when you get a number of false hits, it damages everyone's credibility.
So you've been looking at archive material and release documents in the United States. Do you have any plans to look at the material released, for instance, from Brazil or Britain or France?
Yes,
maybe
absolutely.
In a fourth volume or different?
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of this is still coming out. Britain, the Ministry of Defense in Britain just released another 6,000 pages of UFO-related documents, and I've only just cracked those. Well, humanity is at a crossroads in many respects. We're at a crossroads in the sense of really the survivability of our own infrastructure. And I think that the UFO phenomenon has some potential answers here for us. For example, how long is our society, our civilization, going to be able to survive as a petroleum-based economy? Even if one doesn't believe peak oil is here now, the fact is that unless oil is an infinite supply, which it isn't, I don't think, at some point demand is not going to be able to, demand will outstrip supply. And it's quite possible that we are reaching that point now. If that's the case, the UFO phenomenon offers a real way out, because whatever these objects are using, it's not high-octane gasoline. It's something a lot better than that. So the UFO phenomenon, the UFO reality, is something that can offer practical assistance to us right now. More than that, I think that we as a species are primed to be reinventing ourselves right now. And I say in terms of the development of our computing society, the interconnectedness of telecommunications, and the soon-to-be reality of artificially intelligent computers that will be able to talk to you and tell you that they are a conscious entity, except with vastly greater computing power than even the human brain. So in other words, once we get to a society with that, and that could be as little as 10, 15 years from now.
Some researchers have said that we are dealing with a change in the human species. That there's effectively transhumanization going on? Do you think those kind of technical
These developments in advanced biotechnology combined with developments in nanotechnology and advanced AI, and soon to be quantum computing, we're on the threshold of literally reinventing our species. And that could be something within my lifetime. That could be something within the next 30 years, 20 years even.
Do you think that constitutes a threat to the rest of the people who would then be considered the lower form of human?
Well, absolutely. You know, than anything that we've ever imagined, that this would be a possibility. We have a lot to deal with. We have the potential, if we're really smart and we do it right, to have a great future, a utopia or a dystopia, some kind of nightmare.
Well, at a political level, do you think the work that you're doing it can get to that kind of audience, the politics, the decision makers, and how can they handle the paradigm of all this material that you're discovering?
Well, I want work like mine and other people who are similar approach to reach political audiences and to reach political decision makers. My approach is simply to be as unargumentative as possible and try to be as detached and objective as I can be, and to point out that this is a topic that is not going to go away. It's something that's going to have to be dealt with, and very probably Stabilize the UFO research community. Fascinating story. And it covers all of the UFO research itself, which is one of the most fascinating untold histories of the modern age. The history of our attempts to understand the mystery of UFOs, an important part in the history of human consciousness. All of those themes are woven together into my book, which describes, as clearly as I could make it, a clear historical narrative. It's a fascinating story. I can't wait to see how it reads.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miles.